I'm Peter Hedgethorne. I'm the Director of Tax Services at Plus Accounting. We're a local full partner for 30 people. We deal with mostly local SMEs. We do quite large companies that need auditing down to smaller companies with specialisms in hospitality, franchises, medical services. And we've got a few clients up in town as well. We've been going for about 28 years now, actually. Started in 1992, and with myself and my partner Paul, and as I said, we've now got 30 people. And we feel we're quite a big player in the local accountancy market. As I said, I deal with the tax services, so I do a lot of corporate work, reorganisations and tax reliefs. My partners deal with audits and general accountancy practice within the local economy. We've got a particular specialism in sort of digital areas and video games. We do a lot of tax relief claims for video games tax relief, research and development relief. Sort of things that we're facing at the moment. Initially, a lot of people were going on to a job retention scheme because they had to furlough their staff. We've got a few people who are using the self-employment income support scheme, although most of our clients tend to be corporate, so we haven't got a lot of exposure to that. But we're well up on the proposals. Got a lot of clients who are looking for grants and receiving grants from local authorities, and also, of course, looking at trying to get loans from the banks with varying degrees of success with the different schemes that have been coming out. So that's kind of me summed up and what I'm doing at the moment. How about you, Mark?
I'm Mark Horsfield. I'm Assistant Manager at Accounting, part of the Business Services team. So we deal with mainly the SMEs and some self-employed sole traders as well. We cover a wide range of industries, but mainly we specialise in video games and other IT technology companies as well. We have cafes and contractors and all sorts, a wide range of different industries. So each have different issues and climate. So the cafe ones are the ones that are struggling most because they've obviously had to shut. Whereas some industries have found that business has been booming. So it's been a mix of different queries coming in from the clients. Sort of a lot of common queries, especially in regards to the furlough scheme for their employees, is the practicalities of doing the claims. So I've helped a lot of people file these claims and help them, guide them through how to do it, really. So furlough scheme obviously been in the news a lot. Just a brief summary. It's started. You can make claims backdated to the 1st of March 2020. So that's when it became available. It became available to some a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, if you've got employees, they have to be obviously furloughed, so they can't do any work. For director-only clients, it's been a bit hazy in terms of government guidelines and if they're eligible for the claim, but generally, as long as they're not sort of promoting the business or trying to generate sales, and they've only been doing sort of director duties in the role of maintaining the business and admin side of it, generally that's been viewed if they can make a furlough claim if it's applicable to them and their business has ceased. So furlough claims, obviously, you're allowed 80% of their average wage up to a maximum of 2,500. You also have to claim any employer pension contributions as a result of the furlough pay, as well as Class 1 national insurance, employer national insurance contributions as well. Some common things we found, obviously, there is difficulty in sort of calculating the average pay, especially if they're on variable pay or they're only recently joined in the tax year. The best thing to do is look at the government advice. They provide a lot of calculations on different scenarios where if they've been employed throughout the year or started in the year, or as variable rates have been getting is mainly to do with working out an average, and then trying to keep the average there. Obviously, it's looking at pay rates sort of before March 19th. So you're probably looking at the February 20 sort of salary as if it's the fixed rate, and you can make the claim there. So the maximum you claim does vary depending on which month you're doing. So HMRC website does advise the maximum daily rate. It's obviously slightly higher for April because there's a less day in there. So if you're doing a claim which covers multiple periods, that's something you have to consider in the calculation there. It's adjusting for the different daily rates that are available if your salary goes above the maximum there. Another thing also to consider with that is you're making a claim for April is the employment allowance. A lot of people have confused that they can make a claim for employers' national insurance on the basis of furlough claim, but for April, obviously, you get a new employment allowance, which is up to £4,000. So generally, for most of the April claims I've seen, they've not been able to claim for the national insurance side of it because it would have been covered by the employment allowance. So you can only claim for it when it's due. So depending on the level of employers' national insurance you pay each month, if you've got employees, you have to consider at what point are you then due to pay national insurance, and then that's when you would sort of make a claim for that in the government. Generally, it has been quite complex when sort of signing in. You have to have your own individual government gateway to sign in. You can't ask ourselves to do it or your own accountant to do it. You have to log in with your own government gateway. So it's quite easy to set up. You need an email address and it sends you a code to sign in to do so. And then once you're set up, then you also have to set up your PAYE for employers. So you need your reference numbers, your office reference, your PAYE reference. Again, that's quite simple to set up. Once you've got logged into your government gateway, you can then go in and set up the PAYE for employers. So once all of that is set up, you then can make the claim, and then it involves going in. You require details of employees, so the full name, national insurance number, and you have to have. They will ask you for the figures for what you're claiming for. You have to enter the employees individually with their individual national insurance number, but the general claim is just the total. So you have a gross wage claim, you have an employer's pension claim, and you have a national insurance claim, and it is totals up there. And it also needs your bank account details if it's being paid to a company account or an individual account. You just need the details there to fill in and then submit the claim there. And usually it takes up to 5 or 6 working days, I believe, to pay it. But I spoke to one client and they received it within 3 days. And they submitted it in the first week. So the claims are going through quite quickly. If you haven't yet made one or in the process of making one, hopefully the money should reach your account within quite soon after you made the claim. So generally the claims are going through quite well.
Yeah, well, the self-employed clearly aren't covered by the job retention furlough scheme because they're not employees. They may have employees themselves, so they might be accessing the furlough scheme for them, but for themselves personally, they were initially left out of the support schemes. But after obviously there's a lot of fuss in the press and generally after a few weeks, they announced what's called the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme, which is on similar lines. You have to work out an average profit, make sure that they qualify basically if their profits are less than 50,000 annually, and their trading profit is more than half of their total income, then generally they will qualify, and they'll get 80% of their average profit for a 3-year period, up to a maximum of £2,500 a month for 3 months. So there hasn't been a lot of detail about how these claims will be made. A lot of the HMRC have been concentrating mostly on the furlough scheme, but on Monday they released a web page, which enabled self-employed people to just go in and check to see whether they actually were eligible for the grants. We've had a good look at that, and it seems to work pretty well. It's very user-friendly. You just go and all you have to do is put in your self-assessment reference, your 10-figure UTR, and your national insurance number, and it comes up with a screen to say we think you're due a grant or we don't think you're eligible, and that's it. If it thinks you're eligible, then it tells you when you can start to make a claim, and those claims are starting on the 13th of May, and you'll be given a date when you can make your own claim. If it says you're not eligible, then it's a bit of a different situation, obviously. You may feel that you are eligible, and there is a process then to go through where you can take it up with HMRC to find out why they think you're not, whether you're actually right or wrong. Obviously, we think that this is probably where we're going to be asked to help quite a bit, because we haven't had experience of people being rejected when they think they shouldn't have been, but I expect it probably will happen. What HMRC are doing is just going through figures that they've got on their computer and tallying them up to the details that you input, and just coming out with these blanket rejections or acceptances. So if anybody does get a rejection when they think they shouldn't, from their own calculations, then they may need to seek help from their accountants. So they're people like us. Also, when they go into, if they are accepted and they're told when to make their claim, then they'll be going in the week commencing the 13th of May and making their claim. We don't know what sort of setup that's going to be, because it hasn't started yet, but I would imagine that it's going to be some system where you're told how much grant you're eligible for, and it may say how they've arrived at that, or it may not. Now, people may look at that and say, "Oh, yeah, that's what I think it should be. So let's fire away and put the claim in and get the money, and it's supposed to come within 6 days." But I suspect in a lot of cases that it won't be exactly what people are expecting, by the nature of these things. And at that point, we are expecting to be asked to help, or we'll be offering to help, obviously, our clients to check that the amount that they're being offered is the correct amount. But we won't know the detail of that until starting the 13th of May, when the claims go live. What HMRC have said is that they're going to pay the whole of the 3 months grant in one lump sum. So the maximum anyone can get is £7,500, and the earliest they'll get it, according to the information we've got, is 6 days from the 13th, 6 working days from the 13th of May. So it should be coming fairly quickly. They initially said it would be sometime in June, but it appears it's going to be a bit earlier than that, which is good. So hopefully that'll run smoothly, but we're expecting to get a bit involved with some of our clients, as I said. That money is taxable, so you have to include it in your profits when you do your accounts for this period. This is a tax return for 18-19 with trading profits on it, and you have to have been trading in 1920 and continuing to trade, or would have liked to have been continuing to trade in 2021. And if you have submitted a tax return for 18-19, they'll look at that initially to establish whether you qualify under the 50,000 stroke 50% rule. Otherwise, they'll look back over the 3 years to April 19 to see if you qualify on that basis instead. And if you do, you will qualify for the grant. And then to work out how much you're due to be paid, once they've established you qualify, then they'll look at the average for the 3 years to 5th of April 19. Now, obviously, not everyone would have been trading for the whole of that period. They may have been trading for 2 of the 3 years. As long as they've got 18, 19 in there, then the average will be worked out on whatever you've been doing during that 3-year period. So those are the sort of people that we suspect may need a bit of help in checking their grant offers by HMRC to make sure they've calculated it correctly. The other issue was it when they'll be getting their grants. In the case of the furlough scheme, they're specifically not allowed to do any. That the employees aren't allowed to do any income-producing work or even promote the business in order to qualify for. So the employer qualifies for the furlough grant, whereas with self-employed, there's no such restriction. All you've got to do is confirm or declare that your business has been negatively affected by the pandemic crisis, and it is simply a self-declaration. So there's no restriction on you being able to carry on trading throughout the whole period, as long as you've got some form of evidence that you have been adversely affected. And it's kind of hard to believe that anyone wouldn't be able to come up with something to demonstrate that they had been affected in some way. So the qualification route along the long lines of activity is fairly straightforward, actually. Yeah, bank loans. That obviously has been quite controversial since the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme was introduced, owing to the sort of lack of availability of the funds because of the qualification procedures which the banks were going through. I think that's all been fairly well publicised, the number of claims that were made and the number of loans that were handed out has been quite limited. There have been moves over the past few weeks since it was introduced to make it easier for the banks to allow these loans. They're not allowed to ask for guarantees over up to £250,000 for personal guarantees for directors of limited companies, and also they've been told not to expect people to be able to come up with forecasts showing that the business will be able to definitely fund the repayments, because everyone's now accepted the fact that nobody can do that in the current situation. So those particular loans, what we call the SIBLs, they are getting easier to obtain now. There still is only an 80% guarantee by the government on those, but banks are supposed to just be looking at viability as at the end of December now to see whether they should be granted or not. So I think there's been about 4.5 billion advanced now, so it's getting there. The banks, from my experience, are becoming a lot more flexible in what they're willing to grant people. But despite that, as you know, the bounce back loans were brought out last week, and the details were put forward just on Monday, which specifically only allow the banks to look at the situation at the end of December. I've actually had a look at one of the application forms, because the Chancellor's big plug on this was that you'll be able to look at a straightforward 3-page application, send it in, and you'll have the money within days. And it's going to be quite a straightforward application form. And I have had a look at it, and it doesn't actually ask for a lot. They've asked some basic questions to work out whether you had a viable business at 31st December. And it is quite straightforward. Either you did by definition or you didn't, depending on how you answer the various questions. So you'll hopefully, obviously it's very early days with these applications because they've only been sending them out since Monday. But it looks as if you can tick all the boxes, you can claim up to 25% of your turnover. Not for the, I think it's for the year to December 19, with a cap of 50,000. So for a lot of small businesses, say one or two person businesses, £50,000 is probably going to be out of reach anyway, because you need to have a turnover clearly of 200,000 for that particular period to hit the 50 grand loan. But that's all worked out for you on the form, so they'll tell you how much you qualify for, and it looks like as long as you can tick these boxes I'm talking about for viability at the end of December, you should just be able to sign the form online, get it back to the bank with the figure on it that you're eligible for, and hopefully the money will literally come out within days. Clearly the bank's liability has been limited by the 100% guarantee, which is great. And you don't have to pay any, as with the Sybils, you don't have to pay any interest or make any loan repayments for 12 months. And the rate of interest has been set at 2.5% once the interest applies after 12 months. And it's for a maximum of six years from when the advance is made. And you can make repayments without penalty whenever you want to. So it is a really good scheme. We haven't had any practical experience of the money coming out yet, for obvious reasons. But if it all goes according to the plans that I've seen, it should be really good.
I think businesses at the moment should be really considering their cash flow side of it. So it's really, if you can do it daily or at least weekly, keeping an idea of what your costs are and what your income is, and trying to forecast your sort of expected incomes and outgoings for next month, next 2 months, next 3 months. Because unfortunately, with this pandemic, it's not a case of once it's finished, everything will go back to normal. It looks like it's going to be staged, so your business might be affected going forward. So it's worth trying to create a realistic sales forecast for your business or your trade going forwards, to try and identify issues, any sort of like funding issues that you might experience. So it's also worth considering looking at the cost side of it. So working out what your fixed costs are, what your variable costs are. So it's pretty simple with variable costs. You try and reduce them to as little as possible. If you can operate without them, do you need that cost? And if you can, are you tied into a contract? Can you just cancel it straight away, or are you tied in for 6 months or something or other? Your fixed costs is, if you've got business premises, or you have rents or anything like that. If in terms of sort of business premises, is whether or not you can get a payment holiday with your landlord or defer a month's rent, or obviously it's likely you're still going to require payment. So whether or not you can spread the cost over, say, 3 months or 6 months, something like that, or get a month's off, or whether reduce rates. Even though you might be in a fixed contract, obviously the way things are at the moment, it's worth contacting these people to try and see if there's anything they can help you with in terms of the amount of cost you are. What else can I say?
Well, it's important that businesses make most of the tax deferral.
Yeah, so if you're VAT registered business, obviously payments at the moment are not required. They're deferred until March next year. Obviously, again, they still require payments, so you are still sort of trading and can make payments towards it. It's worthwhile doing so. But if you are got immediate cash flow issues and can't make a payment, although that return bill that obviously is deferred for you for the time being, it relates to payment between March and June, I believe. So I think it ends the 30th of June for your VAT deferral. So if your payment was expected by then, that is automatically deferred, so you don't have to make payments for that. In terms of your self-assessment return, obviously July is the payment account expected. So that's the case. That's being deferred to January, 31st of January next year. So again, you've got extra time to pay that bill, but again, it still needs to be paid. So you have to keep that in mind. You can't just forget about it. still worthwhile getting your tax return, if you need to do one, prepared as soon as possible, just so you can work out what your tax liability is and you can start planning ahead to it. If you, towards the end of the tax year which finished, if you did suffer a drop in business, and turns out your tax liability was less than what it was before, it's possible that you've overpaid already. So potentially you might be able to get a refund early on if your first payment on account was quite high and you suffered. Essentially, this sort of lockdown, even though the lockdown came into March, businesses have been struggling for 3-4 months before then. So potentially you might have reduced earnings there as well. So it's worth getting your tax return done just to know what your liability is, and then you can plan accordingly for it.
The grants were announced fairly early on, and the government passed on the responsibility for handing out the grants to the various local authorities. Obviously, our local one being Brighton and Hove City Council. And the loans, initially, the two types of loans, one for small businesses and one for the retail, hospitality and leisure sector. They're all based around you being registered for business rates. The small business grant being one for businesses that qualify for one of the business rates reliefs, and that's for £10,000, which would be tapered if your rateable value is between 12 and 15. So that's the small business one. That's for any sector that qualifies for one of these reliefs. The larger relief is £25,000 per property, which is for businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector, and the rateable values can't be more than 51,000 for them to qualify for that. But I have clients who've got 3 or 4 properties, between 15 and 51,000. I've been getting £75,000 of grant paid by the local authorities, and it's quite a simple process to get that. So if anybody hasn't got that grant yet, then they need to make inquiries of their local council and look on their website. But I suspect the vast majority of those have gone through. The only problems being where the local authority hasn't got up-to-date contact details, and the business owner, for some reason, who isn't aware of the fact that they're due this grant, which I think would be quite unusual, really. But as I've said, all these both these reliefs relate to people who have got some form of exposure to business rates, and clearly that has been highlighted as a bit of a gap in the grant system. So the top-up grants were announced last week, which is supposed to try to fill this gap. They're called discretionary grants, and again, they've been passed down to local authorities to administer, and they're supposed to be looking at their particular circumstances in the local economy and deciding which sectors will qualify for these particular grants. Now, it's early days with this, and they've only been given the rules on Monday, and the councils will be working on these at the moment to work out who they think will get it. The government have announced 4 sectors which they think should be given some sort of priority, which one of which particularly applies to our area, I think, and particularly a lot of our clients, which is people who share space, so they don't actually have any business rates, because the owner of the space will pay that bill, but they could be have quite a large rental exposure, but no rates, therefore not qualifying. So those sort of people, the government has asked the local authorities to consider them in particular for these grants. Also, market traders who have regular stores in their markets. There's another one. Charities who don't pay business rates, And another one particularly relevant to our area, I suppose, is bed and breakfast businesses, many of which will pay council tax rather than business rates. So we know that the council will be looking at those particular areas, but they will have presumably been given some sort of guidance as to what other areas they should look at. And because obviously all the different areas in the country all have different types of businesses who will have been missed out by the main grants. So at the moment, there's nothing that anybody can do about this. We're waiting for the local authority to announce how they're going to assess these grants and who will qualify. So we just need to wait and see on this, but hopefully it won't be too long. I mean, Brighton and Hove City Council have been pretty good on these grants from my experience. So I'm hoping that something should be coming out pretty soon on that. So it's kind of watch this space.